Greetings. It is time for our monthly inflation update, given that that is the hot topic in the media. And the media narrative is about scaring people and telling people how hyperinflation is going to impoverish them. And no matter how untrue that statement is, that is a narrative that is profitable for the media because the media is in the business of making people either angry or frightened. Now, there are some elements of the government who would certainly like there to be high inflation, but the fact is they have not been able to generate it. So what is the actual data? In all this screeching about hyperinflation or even just ultra-high inflation, you see very few people actually presenting proper graphs and charts. They will cherry pick a certain data point and overuse the word hyperinflation when in fact hyperinflation, the official definition, is 50% inflation in a month. Not a year, 50% in a month. That is the definition of hyperinflation. That has never happened in the United States in almost 250 years and is certainly nowhere near about to happen now. And anyone who says that we are going to have hyperinflation, or even worse, says that we already have hyperinflation, like that Economics Explained channel, which you'll see in the card to the upper right-hand corner, is just very disingenuous or otherwise doesn't know anything about economics. Now, as you recall, a few weeks ago, I created a brief table about what threshold I consider to be inflation that is trending higher than optimal. And the threshold is if the US CPI 10-year average compounded growth rate, moving average, is above 3%, and at the same time, if the Goldman Sachs Commodity Index 10-year compound annual growth rate is also above 3%. The two have to be above 3% at the same time. If only one is above 3%, even that doesn't count because that still represents just pockets of inflation. The Goldman Sachs Commodity Index is the more comprehensive of the two metrics because it is not only worldwide, but it also takes into account prices of commodities as they actually trade. So it's not something that can be rigged in any way. A lot of people say the US CPI is rigged. That's not actually true. And if they really think it's rigged, they can look at the Goldman Sachs Commodity Index. The US CPI is the inflation rate of just one country, the United States. It's the largest economy in the world, but it is the inflation rate of just one country. The reason we add it at all is because all this hyperinflation false narrative is originating from the US, and everyone who thinks there is hyperinflation in the US has a very US-centric worldview because quantitative easing is worldwide as technological deflation. But the problem with the CPI in addition is that it not only takes into account commodity prices, but also service prices. And while service prices are a function of inflation, it is harder to say that is always the bad type of inflation because that also comprises wage increases. So service price increases have to be indexed against productivity gains in the service sector, and only if prices are increasing while productivity gains in the service sector are low can you say that that is a negative type of inflation. Because if productivity gains are high, even while prices are increasing, then wages are rising faster than the costs of the services. So that's not always a bad thing. Whereas commodity price increases are always inflation because labor is a much, much smaller component of commodity prices. So where are we, in fact, today, November 9th, 2021? So as always, we go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics website, and we go to the Consumer Price Index. So over here in the Bureau of Labor Statistics, we go to formatting options, and I've chosen original data, 1 month, 3 month, and 12 month. Okay? This is the original data, and it's rising as you would expect under the normal cruising speed of desirable inflation, which in my opinion is 3% a year. 2 to 3% is normal. We'll come back to this to calculate the actual annual compounded growth rate. Now the 1 month data is very noisy, as you can see. It's kind of up here, but this is what grabs the headlines. You can see on a 3 month basis, the peak is already behind us. And while it is choppy over here, it's not rising much anymore. So whatever little blip got all this media hype going, it's already in the past. And the 12-month level, yep, it's currently high, but it's also just offsetting this low period that was there because of the COVID-19 situation. So the only thing that matters is the average. Now, what is the average annual growth rate of the last 10 years? Looks to be about 2%, but we will calculate it exactly like we do every month. So we go up to this topmost data, and with the calculator, we take a 10-year moving average, which is this number, 276.7, and this number, 227, from 10 years ago, and take the annual growth rate, which is the 1/10th root of this. So 277 divided by 227 equals 1.22, so 22% inflation over 10 years, and you take the 1/10th root of that, 0.1. 1.02, and you minus 1 and multiply by 100, to get the easier representation of percentage. 2%, 2.01%, but the average annual growth rate of inflation over the last 10 years is 2% for the US CPI. That is optimal. That is not high inflation, and it's certainly not hyperinflation. It is 2%, and the recent uptick is in fact bringing inflation to a better level. It was below 2% until now. So this is a favorable development, mind you. This is creating more inflation that technological disruption can consume, and it is a fuel of technological progress. If it got too high, yes, it would be a problem, but at the beginning of the video, I pointed out at what level I would consider this number to be too high, and it's nowhere close to that yet. So now we go to the second metric, which is the Goldman Sachs Commodity Index. Goldman Sachs Commodity Index, 1 year, it's risen 57%. That's huge, right? But remember, we care about the 10-year mark. What is the 10-year growth rate? Minus 1.3%. Minus 1.3%. It has been in deflation for 10 years. People are screaming how oil prices might be $81 a barrel now, but 10 years ago it was $110 a barrel. That is deflation. Minus 1.3%. This is why gold is not rising. This is why oil is so much lower than it was 10 years ago. Minus 1.3%. So that is deflation. So we go back to our table over here and see if we are close to this threshold. Is the 10-year growth rate of the US CPI 3% a year? And is the 10-year growth rate of the Goldman Sachs Commodity Index 3% a year? And as we just saw, the CPI is at 2%, 2.0%, and the Goldman Sachs Commodity Index is at minus 1.3%, so a far distance from 4%. Until both of these are above 3%, I won't say that inflation is starting to edge high, and only then would we say that the amount of quantitative easing has to be tapered or even paused slightly. The fact that the Federal Reserve is already talking about tapering its quantitative easing is a terrible idea. It is something that I discuss in this video up here on the right-hand side. But they are doing this proactively under a fear of high inflation that has just not manifested. And the last 5 times they did this, they caused a market correction, and they were forced to print more money than ever before because they just don't understand that technological deflation is exponential, therefore quantitative easing has to be exponential. And the US is just one country that does about 1/4 of the world's money printing. The other 3/4 is not done by the US. Japan is a country that does 4 times as much quantitative easing in proportion to the size of its economy as the US does, and no one is claiming that Japan has high inflation or even has adequate inflation. Japan still has borderline deflation. So anyway, this was the inflation update that we do every month, and I urge everyone to consider these metrics when believing whether there is high inflation or not. Don't listen to the media. The media is designed to scare you, and when things moderate, the media is nowhere to be found. I guarantee that by March, April, or May, a lot of the headlines about inflation will be greatly muted because the data will have moderated back down, and these numbers will still be nowhere close to 3% at all. That is a certainty. So this is how to parse the actual data versus being swayed by all the media scare tactics and all the people who like to talk about inflation because they want to pretend they know about a complicated subject when they don't. But if you found your way to this channel, then you are certainly more informed than most people who opine about these subjects. And if you like this type of content, I encourage you to subscribe to this channel. Thank you very much for watching.